I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Omni viewer, and during my little Christmas break, I decided to take some time to watch the latest animated Sonic the Hedgehog series entitled Sonic Prime. Didn't take me very long, it's only 8 episodes as of season 1, and as usual, when I watch something new, I figured I'd share my thoughts on it. I am a bit of a Sonic fan, even though I'm not much of a gamer. I do follow Sonic the Hedgehog, and of course, Sonic has appeared in other mediums that I am familiar with movies, animation, things like that. Sonic Prime, of course, was going to catch my eye, and I was curious, especially since it's a multiverse story. And there's been kind of a surge in telling multiverse stories while also a pushback from audiences against it. Because, well, I guess part of it is just the natural thing of when something starts becoming really popular, there's always going to be a little crowd who's going to push back against it anyway. But at the same time, I mean, there are some pretty good cases to be made for why most of the multiverse stories we've seen recently aren't doing so hot. Like with Marvel Phase 4, for example, a lot of people don't like the multiverse direction that story is going, largely because, well, in quality of the individual movies aside, there's also the fact that we really don't have a firm grasp on what the multiverse is really like yet, because all of the different things we've been getting to describe it are contradictory. First, it was implied that the multiverse was something that the sorcerers already knew about way back in the first Doctor Strange. Then Endgame implied that the different parts of the multiverse might be the result of diverging timelines, except Loki came along and said maybe that's not the case, and then it somehow is still anyway. But then Doctor Strange 2 came along and said, actually, we don't know that much about the multiverse. Then Spider-Man No Way Home, well, actually, that was before Multiverse of Madness, but technically it still went with this idea that the multiverse is already out there, and apparently the previous 2 Spider-Man series were part of it, which explains why they don't look like Tom Holland, and yet every alternate version we see of every other Marvel character looks like the same actor from the primary timeline, only they're apparently not going to keep John Krasinski as Mr. Fantastic anymore. It's a convoluted mess. There's no firm understanding of how this multiverse works just yet. So I can understand why there would be a bit of a pushback, because when what you're getting isn't meeting a good standard, naturally people are going to be resistant. And that's to say nothing of that Flash movie that's coming up, inexplicably still, which is also going to be part of the multiverse, I think. Not that it matters, because they're rebooting everything with DC anyway. And yet, I think anyone, even someone who wouldn't necessarily think multiverses are a good idea, could look at Sonic Prime and say that it is a good example of a multiverse story. That's a multiverse done right. The basic idea is that in the primary timeline, Team Sonic goes to stop Eggman from getting a certain kind of crystal that's been hidden away in a cave. And because Sonic acts recklessly, he winds up shattering the crystal, and when he wakes up, he's in a cyberpunk dystopia where his friends don't know each other, they have different names, they're sort of scattered and separate, and none of them know him. He is a stranger to all of them. And what follows is him basically discovering that reality has shattered. He doesn't quite remember the details at first, but early on he figures out that there are apparently multiple realities. The 3 we visit in this season are the cyberpunk dystopia, the jungle primal landscape, and an ocean-based clockpunk pirate world. The latter of which, that's my favorite one. I could watch an entire series that was just a pirate spin on the Sonic story. But those are the three we visit for now. There's one other that we visit temporarily, but I feel like saying anything more about that might be a spoiler to anyone who hasn't seen it, so I'll just leave it at that. So why does this work as a multiverse story? Well, a large part of it is because, unlike the other multiverse stories that people have been so critical of recently, this one has a firm idea of how its multiverse works. It even has an origin point. The multiverse happens when Sonic shatters the crystal. And having done that, there are all sorts of different realities where everyone else he knows exists and all the different locations exist. He, however, does not. And there are shards of these different crystals in each of those realities. And from there, that's about the most basic way I can describe it. And that's all we really need to know going in. There haven't been any convoluted rules or contradictory bits of trivia added as yet that would make us think, wait a minute, how does this work? No, they have a straightforward idea and they're sticking to it as of season 1. So that is the primary thing that makes it work. The other thing that makes it work is that the worlds we go to are actually pretty interesting. Again, getting back to Marvel, when we had Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, now just by that title alone, you would think that implies like going to some crazy realities that bend the mind and, just you can't even comprehend some of them. However, other than a quick montage of Strange and America Chavez passing through a bunch of different realities until they land in the one where they spend the majority of their time, and that's a quick montage compared to the rest of the movie, other than that, we don't really get that. We see some interesting things, but most of our time is spent in an alternate reality where the weirdest things are that pizza is spherical and you cross the street on red rather than green. Madness, I tell you. But in Sonic Prime, like I said, there's a whole cyberpunk landscape. There's a jungle landscape. There's an oceanic pirate landscape. These are very distinct realities, each one coming with its own set of rules and its own twists on the different characters and locations. And it's interesting to see Sonic hop around to all these different places and have to keep readjusting every time while also figuring out how he can somehow set things right. Because every new reality he goes to, it's not a good place to be. Obviously, the cyberpunk is almost never a good place. But the jungle landscape has its own problems, the pirate landscape has its own problems, and Sonic is there to try setting things right. Which actually leads to a rather interesting part about it. Something which, in later seasons, could be a problem if they take a misstep, but based on season 1, I'm pretty certain they know what they're doing. Okay, so like I said, the main thing uniting all these different realities is that Sonic does not exist in any of them. Whenever he shows up, everybody he knows is there, but there's no alternate version of him. And every time he goes there, it's always a problem. His friends are separated. Sometimes they are at war with each other, or they're just sort of directionless with no real goal or idea of what they're doing. And it's not until he shows up and provides a sort of fixed point for them to unite around that things start getting back on track. Now, in a very weird way, you could look at that like it's the Sonic the Hedgehog version of It's a Wonderful Life, where we see what an impact one individual can have on an entire community. At the same time, though, the fact that this is a multiverse story and the fact that we keep seeing it throughout, that can lead to some interesting things down the line, some of which might get complicated. See, here's the thing. By applying this idea to a multiverse, and by saying that Sonic is the one thing that sets things right in each of those universes, we're essentially looking at Sonic Prime being a protagonist-centered reality. Now, I know that might sound a bit weird, and some of you might think, well, wait a minute, aren't all stories centered around the protagonist? Well, yes, stories are, but a protagonist-centered reality is a little bit different. In a protagonist-centered reality, everything hinges on the existence of the protagonist. his or her absence somehow causes everything to fall apart. Again, look at It's a Wonderful Life. Even though it's still considered a classic film, there are those who critique that whole segment of seeing the world if you had never been born that is the most famous part of that movie. Because even though the message is supposed to be that this one man had a great impact on this community, so one life does make a difference, no life is truly worthless, you could argue that It's a Wonderful Life leans so heavily into that it winds up presenting this community as completely helpless without this one man. He is the linchpin. Without him, this community is doomed. Now, if that's actually the case, or if it's just people being hyperbolic, is something we can discuss another time, because right now we're talking about Sonic Prime. But that gives you an idea of what a protagonist-centered reality can be like, and also one of the dangers of telling such a story. After all, a protagonist-centered reality, if done wrong, just comes across as an ego trip. And yes, there is a danger, I think, that as Sonic Prime continues, it could fall into that trap, because clearly Sonic is presented as the linchpin for everything. At the same time, though, they've inserted some details that make me think it's not necessarily going to fall into that trap. They could avoid it, because they're not presenting Sonic as perfect. First of all, the fact that reality has shattered is his fault. This multiverse wouldn't exist without him being reckless and doing something stupid. There's also the idea that Sonic, in certain flashbacks, is presented as maybe not being the best kind of person. Like, he has his friends, of course, but he doesn't necessarily get certain things regarding the relationships he has with them, and he's kind of learning that maybe he had more of a responsibility than he even realized. And then, of course, there's the final line that Shadow the Hedgehog says right before the credits roll on the last episode that I will not spoil, again, just in case you haven't seen it. But again, it's all pointing in the direction of me thinking maybe they can avoid having this be an ego trip. It all depends on how Season 2 turns out. All I can say for certain right now is that Season 1 did work, and that I would love to see Sonic the Hedgehog Pirate Edition be its own thing. But whatever the case, the show is off to a good start. I have no idea how long they can possibly stretch this concept out, mind you. I mean, with an infinite number of realities, they could potentially keep it going as long as they want, but you don't necessarily want the show to overstay its welcome either. Whatever the case, it seems like they have a plan, and I'm curious to see what the next part of it is. And those are my thoughts. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.
Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books, Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.